So our topic today is on moral relativism in tyranny. And I'd like to go back to April 18th, 2005, at a mass that the conclave was preparing for the election of a new pope. Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger taught, "We are building a dictatorship of relativism, that we do not recognize anything definitively and whose ultimate goal consists solely of one's own ego and desires." He continued on, "Having a clear faith based on creed of the church is often labeled as fundamentalism, whereas relativism seems the only attitude that can cope with modern times." One day later, Cardinal Ratzinger was named the successor to Peter. So we can start there with this problem of relativism, a very famous line that's now come out of it, the dictatorship of relativism. Now, any of the college students that are here, or if you can recall back to when you were in college, you always have, as a teacher, have the same problem. You ask a student, "What do you think about this?" And their answer is always, "Well, I think it depends." Every time I think it depends. That's a very good answer in philosophy, it depends. What does it depend on, right? Well, I think it's up to the individual. I think everyone should decide for themselves, right? At that point, I say, aren't you calling yourself a good Christian? Because essentially what you're saying is God is dead. Because you're saying each individual determines what is right and what is wrong. I thought God determined what is right or what is wrong, right? So that usually surprises them when you say when you're saying that, you're essentially saying God is dead. Why do students always say, it depends on the individual? Well, modern culture often tells us that the solution to our deepest conflicts is simply to give up the idea of moral truth existing. If right and wrong is merely a matter of personal preference, then perhaps we can just get along. The sentiment captured memorably by John Lennon's famous invitation to imagine that there's no heaven. In other words, remove God, remove transcendental moral claims, remove anything that might challenge our autonomy, and peace will supposedly follow. Right? Think about that as a claim, right? If we remove all morality, if we remove all truth, all good, all beauty, all unity, is it true that naturally following comes world peace? It is a dream, right? I can't imagine, but I don't imagine it will be true. Classical philosophy in the Christian tradition sees the problem very differently. When truth disappears, justice loses its foundation, and freedom becomes little more than permission granted by those who hold power. What begins as the dream of liberation from an ends, as Pope Benedict XVI warned in the dictatorship of relativism, where nothing is recognized as true and only remains the authority is the will of the strongest. Now, people like Aristotle, going back to the pre-Christian era, or Aristotle and thinkers like C.S. Lewis, they've argued that actually the thing that holds our society together is truth, objective truth. It's the only thing that will keep us from falling into a mob, right? Poor Socrates had to learn that one the hard way, right? That didn't turn out so well for him. If there is no truth, there is no good, there is no evil. Then justice cannot appeal to reason, and law becomes nothing more than the will of those who hold power. So let's consider this axiom for tonight. When objective moral truth is rejected, power becomes the only remaining foundation to the law. Now, I'm going to ask us to look at two different texts, and if we had more time, we could look at far more than that. But the Summa Theologica and C.S. Lewis's The Abolition of Man. Anybody here Summa fan? We got some good Summa fans. It's a hard text, but well worth it. So today we will look at the Prima Secundum, which is the first part of the second book, questions 90 through 94, in case you want to do some reading. An Abolition of Man by C.S. Lewis, well worth reading as well. Okay, so let's start with a little bit of Thomas Aquinas. So if we want to have some type of objective truth, well, this all comes down to natural law. Comes down to law. So if we want to look at the different ways in which we have law, we have eternal law. This is something almost unknowable to us. It's something we grasp at, this eternal law, the divine wisdom of God. God knows it. We hope to know it. We're grasping at it. We also have divine law. Now, divine law, things like the scriptures or the magisterium, they're things that we can know about God because God has revealed himself to us, right? These are very good as well. We also have natural law. Now, natural law is law we can know through observation and reason, which gives us some insight into the eternal law. So whether you're a Catholic or a Protestant or a Buddhist or a Hindu or an atheist, in some sense you can understand the natural law. So I'm somewhat irreverent with my students, so I try not to be too irreverent. But right, do you need the Bible to tell you not to smoke fentanyl? Probably not, right? Like, well, where in Scripture does it say that? Do I need to find a Scripture passage for that? Probably not, right? Because through observation alone, through reason alone, I could say, that's not so healthy. That doesn't turn out so good, right? Now, do you have to be a Catholic to be able to see that? No. Anybody with eyes and a rational mind can realize drugs are bad, right? Drugs are bad, right? Now, there's a lot of other things we can just, through pure observation and reason, could say, yeah, that's bad, or that's good, right? A young couple getting married and having children. I don't need to find a spot in the Scriptures that say it's good. There are spots in the Scriptures that do say it's good, but I don't need to even do that. I could just do my observation. See, it's wonderful that people get married and have children, right? And even if you're an atheist, you can see that's a good thing, right? Or somebody recovering from sickness to health. Where does it say in the Bible that it is good to return from sickness to health? I'm sure there is spots in the Scriptures, but I don't even need to turn to it, right? Through my reason alone, I know that health is better than sickness, right? So our natural law directs us towards these truths, right? And they become objective truths, something that's gotten lost. Now, our human law ought to imitate the natural law, right? So when human law does not mirror natural law, then we might not be authoritative law. It might be valid law, but it's not necessarily authoritative. Thomas Aquinas in the Summa defines law as an ordinance of reason for the common good, promulgated by one who has care of the community, which means it has four parts. As a lawyer, we love to see the parts of things. So the first part, an ordinance of reason. 2, for the common good. 3, promulgated. 4, valid authority. Right? So those four things create what is law. But it has to follow reason and for the common good. Now, again, this might sound so obvious to people, right? That's so obvious. Of course, it has to be law needs to be reasonable. It needs to be for the common good. It needs to be by legitimate authority. It has to be promulgated, obviously. But we're living in a world now where I'm not sure that is true for everyone. What determines the law? Is it really reason or is it power? Right? If the Democrats get in power, they can put in whatever the law they want. Republicans get in power, they can put in whatever law they want. And winners decide. Is that all we're dealing with when we're dealing with law? Is whoever has power? I hope not, right? We're living in a world where it seems to be more and more the case that power determines society. But we should be living in a society not governed by power alone, but by reason, the common good, natural law, imitation of the eternal law. When we do that, we become truly free. When we live according to power, the whole thing falls apart. So Aquinas also teaches that human law must be, I already said that. He writes, the natural law is nothing else than the rational creature's participation in the eternal law. Question 91. Because human beings are rational, we can recognize certain moral truths. For example, good should be done and evil avoided. Human life should be protected. Truth should be pursued. Justice should be practiced. God ought to be properly honored and adored. These are not invented by the government. They are rooted in human nature itself. And this has a huge political consequence. I was talking with Ryan ahead of time about liberalism, and could we just not live in a society based on liberal principles of do whatever you want so long as you don't harm others? That is a certain libertarian model, right? We can do whatever we want as long as we don't harm others. But is that really for the common good? Is that really reasonable? I don't know. I'll throw it out to you all. What do you think? Is it reasonable and for the common good that people should just do whatever they want so long as they don't harm someone else? Anyone? No. Why not? Why not? Yeah.
Well, someone might argue who is in favor of liberalism. They might say, well, it seems that we might just do terrible things, but in reality, it's when we care so much about our moral convictions that we're tempted to use violence in order to get people to agree with us. So it's about decreasing the violence we have towards others. But I don't know. What do you think of that?
Yeah, right. It seems like, right, why do people say, let people do whatever they want as long as they don't harm someone else? It's like, well, because if I let you do whatever you want, I don't have to ever force you to do something against your will. But, right, if you go down to downtown Portland and you see people who are homeless and on the street, substance abuse, mental illness, other issues going on, is freedom really just let the homeless person be homeless? Just let them sleep on the streets. It's 0 degrees outside. But let them do what they want, as long as they don't hurt anybody else. Is that really freedom? What do you think? Wouldn't it be violence to tell that person they can't live on the streets? They'd probably fight you, no?
Well, it's not a violence. It's in order to do justice to somebody, you can't allow them to harm themselves, potentially.
Yeah, it might be an injustice to allow them to harm themselves. Is that what you're going to say? Yes. Yeah, it might be a violence. Yeah. Yeah, right. How about the love of your neighbor? Yeah. Right? Where's the love of your neighbor and just, do whatever you want, including dying on the streets?
That's not compassion.
No, right? Yeah, what do you think?
I don't think people that are out on the street really want to be out on the street.
Probably not.
They've made some bad decisions that have led to their, drugs or whatever.
Yeah, it could be drugs, could be mental illness, something that somebody didn't even choose for themselves, right?
Control.
Yeah. Right, so there's 2 different forms of what we call freedom, right? There's license to do what you want, and then there's freedom for excellence, right? As Catholics, we believe in freedom for excellence, which is rational, right? So with freedom with excellence, I would try to get the person who is on the streets into some type of care so that they get mental health treatment, they get drug treatment, they get whatever resources that they need, and then when they are sane and ready to go, they now are actually free, because they weren't free when they were either mentally ill or drug addicted. That is not true freedom, right? But it is license, right? License to do what you want, right? So we can look at these things and think too, if we're totally relativistic, what I'm saying is to the homeless person on the street, You do you, and I'll do me. Who am I to judge you? Who am I to judge your lifestyle? You do you, and you do me, right? But how do we really live in a society? Is that really a free society? It's questionable whether that's a free society, is just tell the people to do self-destructive behavior, right? So it does end up forcing you to do a little bit of force, right? But not in an awful way, a tyrannical way, but in a way that leads to greater freedom, right? Okay. The truths are not invented by the government. They are rooted in nature itself, right? If moral truth exists independently of political authority, these rules themselves are subject to moral law. Power does not create justice. Now, this goes all the way back. I love teaching a lot of Socrates, Plato, Socrates, right? And this goes all the way back. Some have said in philosophy, all of philosophy is a footnote of Plato. And the more I study philosophy, the more I realize it's true. It's more true. It's true. So you go back to the Republic, classic text. You should read it if you haven't read it, right? Book 1 of the Republic. The question is, what is justice? And Thrasymachus has this important point he's going to make. He argues that justice is, let me get the quote exactly right, the advantage of the stronger. Justice is the advantage of the stronger. Power determines justice, right? Now, that is scary, right? And if it was just something that somebody said 2,400 years ago, maybe we'd move on from it. But Nietzsche has also said this, right? On the geniality of morality, he argues, to speak of the just and the unjust is quite meaningless apart from the perspective of power, right? To Socrates' point, is justice a virtue which must be discerned? Or is, as Thrasymachus or Nietzsche says, justice is power? Right? And we can think to our own political system, our own situation in 2026, and you could look to it that way as well and ask, what is justice? Is it whoever has power determines what is just? Or is there such thing truly as justice, as virtue? Yeah. Now that opens up a whole hotbed of questions, right? But clearly an important question for the day. Justice, in a classical sense, justice judges power, right? Justice judges power. How do we know if somebody who's using power is doing it correctly? Well, justice would be the virtue that you would use to determine if somebody is using power correctly. Giving that which is due to another, right? The question is then, what is due? Then we can turn to natural law and virtue to figure that out, right? If we ignore natural law and virtue, then what determines if power is being used correctly? Well, the powerful will decide if the power is being used correctly, right? And you can see the problem with this, right? If the powerful determine how power is used correctly, then there doesn't seem to really be checks and balances, are there, right? Justice as a virtue creates a barrier to tyranny. You remove justice, you remove any type of barrier to tyranny. In case I move too fast, maybe, right? I want to tell you everything all in the same second, right? That's always the problem, right? Why justice? Well, justice is part of what is right and wrong, which means there must be such thing as right or wrong, which means there's such thing as good, objectively speaking. Because if there is no such thing as good, objectively speaking, then there's no such thing as right or wrong, and there's no such thing as justice. And if there's no such thing as justice, all you have is power. Do you see how it goes? I use, again, in my irreverent way of speaking to my students, I say to them, let's say there's a homeless person and I decide I get pleasure kicking homeless people. Is it wrong? Kicking homeless people?
Yes.
Yes. Why is it wrong? It hurts them. But I get pleasure out of it. So, to each their own, no?
No.
Why not? Why not?
Back to power.
What's that?
Back to power.
Back to power? Yeah, it might be back to power, right? Right. This is where the students get stuck. Because everybody in the room knows it's wrong to kick anybody, right? Never mind homeless people. It's wrong to kick anybody. But why? Yeah, what do you think?
Well, I think the fundamental sort of like law of, like, not only law of morality, you can kind of reduce it all down to like, it's better to exist and to not exist. And
Uh-huh.
as existing as a human like race and as a group of people, like it's better for us to continue existing, and it's better for us to exist more than exist less. And we exist more when our lives are the most full of what God wants them to be, which is joy and beatitude.
Uh-huh.
And so it is better for each and every single person to exist to the greatest possible extent. And you doing that, like, decreases the ability for the homeless man to be able to, like, be the man that God created him to be, which is a violation of the law of nature.
Uh-huh.
And therefore, like, you ought not do it.
You should come to St. Joseph's. Come to St. Joseph. I take that as an answer. That's a good answer. Yeah, right. And in a nutshell, in case you couldn't, right, the more Christ-like you are, the more you exist, the more good you are, the more free you are, right? The more Christ-like you are, right? And kicking homeless person, not very Christ-like, right? Not very. Yeah, right, Ryan?
It's also a question like, why is harming someone bad?
Yeah. Why is harming somebody
If
bad?
there's no objective moral good or evil,
Yeah.
why should I care if harming someone? Like, if all there is power.
Yeah, right. And people will say, like, well, I wouldn't want to be harmed, so then you shouldn't harm that person.
Why should I care?
Yeah, well, but I'm not them, I'm me, right? So why should I care? Why should I care about the suffering of another? Yeah.
I had a hard time hearing what she said, but isn't it about the innate dignity of each individual? A God-created individual. No one is like anybody else on earth.
Yeah.
Each one with that dignity, that's justice.
Yeah, right. The question of the imago Dei, the image of God, right? Every human being, including the homeless man, is in the image of Christ, right? In the image of God, and has human dignity, right? Because God made us. Remove God, then why? Power. Right? You remove God, the whole thing collapses. Because I have to treat that person with human dignity, because they have human dignity, because their dignity is not dependent upon my opinion, it's based on God giving them dignity, not me giving them dignity. And thus, they have human dignity. But if you remove God, not so much, right? Now, the next part of it could be too, like, well, what if I attacked a homeless person? I would imagine some good people here might try to stop me. You think so? Probably, right? But then isn't that just the power of the masses? My power versus the power of the community. If there's more of you than me, then you'll win. But isn't that just still the power of the masses?
But universally in all cultures, there is, whether they believe in God or not, there is a belief, for lack of a better term, the golden rule.
Yeah.
Where there is something intrinsic in all cultures that can perceive what is good, what is not.
Yeah.
And so it goes down to then, I would not want anybody to treat me that way. Therefore, I will treat other people the way I want to be treated.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah. And to everyone, right? Isn't there like something that all people feel about that, right? Right? What do you think?
Don't forget the alternate golden rule.
What's that?
Whoever has the gold rule.
Yeah, there's Thrasymachus for you, right? Whoever has the gold rules, yeah.
Well, just because isn't always compulsory on the human spirit. Just because it doesn't always force us to do the right thing doesn't mean, right? Justice is the power of judging, right? The objectiveness of justice isn't, right? Like, it's not the power and the success of the masses to pull you away that makes their action just. It's the moral consideration that we make, right? Either in the moment or after the fact that determines it. It's not who wins.
Yeah, right? Because if it is just the masses, right, then it assumes, like, I guess that works if, like, the masses are always right. But are the masses always right? Not always, right? Sometimes it's the one person standing up against the world who's correct, right? Like the Socrates type of character, or the Christ, right? Christ stands up against the whole world, right? St. Athanasius said, if the world is against the truth, I am against the world, right? And if the whole world is saying one thing and they're wrong, I still stand up against it, right? Yeah. Now the universalness, we will get back to that, but C.S. Lewis agreed with you. Like, he called it the Tao, and I think he very intentionally used this, like, Buddhist term to de-Christianize it in a sense, because if he talked about, like, the Imago Dei of Jesus, he'd probably lose all the non-Christians, right? And he was trying to speak to as broad of an audience as possible, so he, like, snuck it in using some, like, Buddhist language, but he was really just, like, tricking people. He's being a little tricky, because he really doesn't get the Tao entirely correct from a Buddhist sense. But, like, what he's saying, though, is there is, like, the Tao is the way, translated the way, right? Isn't there, like, the way to be? And by that, he's really talking about natural law, right? Like, by natural law, don't I know that it is wrong to kick innocent people? Right? Do I need to read the gospel to figure that out, right? Or by natural law, can I just figure that out because decent human beings don't do that to one another? Now, C.S. Lewis, he's writing 1943, The Abolition of Man. World War II is still going on, right? And he's a British writer, and he's giving these lectures in Britain, right? And he has this idea that regardless of Catholic or Protestant or atheist or this, can't we all agree that there is a way of being, of decency, of virtue? Because if not, we fall into Nazi Germany, is his fear, right? That's the tyranny, right? If we don't have those virtues. So, a little bit going back. So, modern moral relativism echoes the sophist of the ancient world. Now, a lot of times we like to think of the ancient world as like, well, classical philosophy, they got it right. It's the moderns that have the problem. Really, as soon as you go into ancient philosophy, you realize Socrates was dealing with the same issues we're dealing with today. There were the sophists who did not care about the truth, right? As a sophist, I don't know you guys know the sophist, but as a sophist, right, if I were a sophist, I would write speeches for a living, right? And if you came to me and you said, hey, I have a lawsuit against my friend, I'd be like, okay, give me the facts. And I'd write you the best speech possible. And I'd be like, okay, pay me. I'll give you the speech, right? And then your friend comes to me and I'll be like, I already know what he's going to say. I'll write an even better speech for you, right? Pay me, right? A sophist made great politicians, right? Most people study sophistry went into politics because you wanted to manipulate people with words, right? And it was really all about power. The sophist. Socrates was always fighting against the sophist, right? Thrasymachus was a sophist. Justice is power, right? Now, Socrates was a philosopher. Now, philosophers care about the truth, right? Not the money, but the truth, right? And if we look at things today, there are sophists today and there are philosophers today. There are people who are willing to manipulate for the sake of power. And there are people who care about the truth regardless of what the consequences bring, right? So we could say, oh, the ancient world was just as screwed up as we are, right? Some things, as you learn, like technology changes, but people don't change over time, right? We're the same people as we were in the garden, right? In some ways, we have not changed, right? So, according to relativism, morality is subjective or even emotivist. Now that's an interesting distinction. Probably I'm spending too much time on these distinctions, but I think it's interesting. The subjectivists think that there is right or wrong for me. Again, I hear this all the time in class, right? To me, it is wrong, But I'm only speaking for me, right? I'm only speaking for me, right? Especially on the important life issues, you always hear that, right? I would never have an abortion, but I'm going to never tell anyone else what to do. It's really an unsustainable theory if you think about it, because if what I'm saying is, to me, I would not murder a child, but if you want to murder a child, that's up to you. Wait. Does that really make any sense if you think about it, right? If you say, I don't believe it is a child, well, then that's consistent. But right, if you're saying, morally, I stand against this thing, but to each their own, right? To me, I would never own a slave. But if you want to own a slave, you can own a slave. It's a pretty inconsistent theory when you think about it, because if you're willing to stand on something, right, why would I not, if I'm against slavery, it's because I think that that is a human being who deserves dignity. So it doesn't matter if I'm enslaving the person or my neighbor's enslaving the person. Nobody should enslave the person because that person has dignity, right? So the subjectivism, it's weird, but it overrides our culture today as subjectivism. Even worse, and you almost have to be trained that you got to get a PhD to be this stupid, is emotivist. You got to be really educated to get this one, right? This one is, there is no right and there is no wrong at all. All there is how things make me feel, right? So hurting a homeless person makes me feel bad, so I don't do that. It's not that it's wrong. I just don't like how it makes me feel. Because there is no right or wrong. Yeah, what do you think, Brian?
What they think is that all moral statements are just like explanations.
Right.
When you're saying slavery is wrong, you're saying I'm disgusted with slavery.
Yeah.
It's a claim about you and
your own feelings. Yeah. Right. If I'm just saying slavery is wrong, all I'm saying is slavery. Right. I don't like it. Right. But it doesn't really stand for anything because they don't believe that there is good or bad. Because who determines what is good or bad? If I think something is good and you think something is bad, all we can ever do is agree to disagree. There's no objective standard. Why? For them, God is dead, right? If you have no God, then there is no determining value of why things are right or wrong, right? Now, if I think that something is right and somebody else thinks something's wrong and you believe in God, then the question is, what does God think about that? Right? Because God is the objective truth, right? If you remove God, you removed all morality. In which case, right, and this is where C.S. Lewis worries, then Hitler has power, and why is the morality not Hitler? Right? Or Lenin, or anyone else who gets power, right? All you're saying is, I oppose Hitler is, I don't like that, it makes me feel bad. Who cares, right? But if you could say Hitler is objectively wrong, why? Because he violates human dignity, the imago Dei, right? Why? Well, because God said so, right? It might seem overly simplified, but God saying so is not an insignificant thing, right? For the public it might be, but right, it's actually not that insignificant. Okay. At first glance, relativism, subjectivism, emotivism, they might seem more humble or tolerant, which is why you hear people promoting these ideas all the time. If no one possesses the moral truth, then perhaps we should avoid imposing our beliefs upon them. But others quickly lead to serious problem. If there is no objective moral truth, then there is no standard by which the laws or the government can be judged. Right? So the problem then becomes, how do we even create law? Shouldn't the laws we have in our country be good? Shouldn't they aim us towards good things? Things like justice, equality. But these are virtues, right? These are virtues, right? But why do we have those as virtues? Yeah, Ryan, you had...
Sorry, I had to cut you out. You can continue. But
No, jump.
I just wanted to say, one of the things you can tell these people is like the only reason we value tolerance is because it's an objective good, right? Like, ironically, the only way you can be tolerant is by having an objective morality, right? Like,
Brian, we can't hear you over here. Can you speak up? Please?
The only way we can, like, tolerance is only good because it's objectively good.
Mm-hmm.
If tolerance is not objectively good, there's no reason for us to be tolerant, right? The only way you can justify a tolerant society is if tolerance is actually a good.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Right? So relativism is not tolerant. It actually leads to intolerance.
Right.
Because,
Yeah, right.
if I'm equally right or wrong when I devalue you or do these crazy things, there's no way to judge we're right or wrong. Then tolerance can't be justified either.
Yeah, why should we put up with our enemies at all? They're our enemies. Why should we put up with them at all? Right? Why don't we get revenge at all? Why not just, what do you think there? Yes, there's some type of objective standard, right? That's very good, right? There's an objective standard that says, yeah, we're not going to do that, right? But if I'm simply going by my emotions, then I'm going to be much more focused on revenge. No? Why not? It makes you feel good, right? And you see people who spew out hate. They're releasing it. Why? It's easy. It's pleasurable. But it's not good for you, right? It's not virtue. It's not good for you, right? But you see these people in traffic screaming or whatever, honking and flipping, right? Why? They're living by their emotions, right? There's a certain amount of that might feel pleasurable, but that's probably irrational, right? It's irrational, but it might be what people feel like, right? That's the problem with feeling like. What if we've just made our laws based on feel likes? Or our emotions, or our passions? Might not be the best society, right? Especially with those who end up with power, because they will make laws based on what gives them pleasure and what is good for them, right? Which is not for the common good, which is what Thomas Aquinas asked for, right? So consider the question. On what basis could we say that slavery is wrong if morality is merely subjective? On what grounds could we condemn genocide even? Without objective moral truth, these judgments become expressions of preference rather than statements of fact, moral fact, right? And when moral disagreements cannot be resolved through reason, they can only be resolved through power. Right? So if you have two sides and they disagree, how will they figure it out? Power. Right? Versus reason. Right? Reason would be a wonderful way to figure out, right? Have a debate. Right? But if they're not willing to have a debate, what happens, right? This goes also back to Socrates, book 1 of the Republic, right? Socrates, at one point, he's going down to this festival. He's trying to go home. Thrasymachus and Polemarchus come running after him. They say, come with us to our father's house. Socrates says, I'm old and it's late. I want to go home. I know how he feels, right? And so I'm old, I'm late. I want to go home. And they go, no, we are stronger than you. You must follow us. And Socrates says, what if I convinced you to let me go? To which Polemarchus responds, you cannot convince somebody who is unwilling to listen. Which is the story of the philosopher, right? You cannot convince people who are unwilling to listen. And when people are unwilling to listen, what wins? Power, right? So that's how it ends up going down, right? So C.S. Lewis, again, I mentioned the Tao already. Lewis argues that through the human history, civilization has recognized a shared moral framework. He calls this framework the Tao, spelled T-A-O too, in case you ever see that in his writings. The Tao refers to the universal moral law recognized across cultures. He refers to universal truths that recognize all cultures and all times. Things like honesty, justice, courage, duties to parents, duties to children, respect for life. right? Now, maybe he was overly optimistic, but he thought all cultures actually had a certain common value to them. And if we could return to that common value, right, and stick to those principles and hold them out as objective truths, we might actually get world peace, right? But if we reject the Tao, the way, virtue, the good, right? If we all stop pursuing the good, power will win and the world will collapse into tyranny. Lewis writes, "The thing which I have called the Tao is reality beyond all predicates, the abyss that was before the Creator himself." The Tao includes principles such as justice, honesty, courage, respect for human life. Lewis insists that every moral system ultimately depends on this foundation. The modern education system teaches students the moral judgments are merely subjective feelings. Now, don't get me started on the modern education system. But C.S. Lewis brought it up, so we're going to go there a little bit. He gave a story in the Abolition of Man, right at the beginning. It's the very beginning when he reads it, about the Green Book, which is not actually, it is a green book, but it's not the title of the book. But he didn't want to embarrass the authors. But it was a grammar book of his time, and within the grammar book there was the example that seeing this beautiful waterfall gave you feelings of awe, they gave you feelings of sublimity, but the waterfall itself was not sublime. It was simply your feelings about the waterfall, right? Because there is nothing sublime. There are only feelings people have about things. And his criticism of this was that this is a grammar book. But what is it really teaching students who read this in their elementary school? That there are no sublime things in the universe. That there is no objective truth in the universe. There are only things and then how you feel about them. All of reality is how you feel. There is no objective truth, right? And C.S. Lewis says, I don't even think that they know what they're doing. I don't even think that they're bad intentioned. They're just echoing this garbage out of their mouth of this subjective, relativistic, emotivist nonsense because it's very progressive and tolerant and nice. And don't we all want to be progressive, tolerant, and nice? Do we all? Yeah, So, let's not make any moral judgments. Let's not make any truth judgments, right, about anything. I feel sublime. You feel nothing. To each their own, right? And he says that is the problem, right? And he says this is the problem that's going to bring down our society. Sneaking philosophy into everything, right? Now, this is where, don't get me started on the public schools, right? Because I'm taking a master's in education class right now just for fun. Also, I don't have to pay back my student loans as long as I take a class, which is a nice thing. Especially when I get classes for free, since I teach at a university. So I take masters in education classes, right? So, first assignment we had, story about a little boy they're supposed to paint a flower, and the teacher the kid paints a flower, then the teacher draws a flower, and his flower doesn't look like his teacher's flower, so he crosses his out and he draws one like his teacher. And he does it again for another thing. The moral of the story, and all the teachers responded afterwards, right, in this text, you should never control a child's creativity. All creativity is good. What the teacher should have done is just seen what anything the kid drew and should have praised him to no end because you wanted more creativity. Right? And I read that and I thought, this is exactly C.S. Lewis's Green Book. It's the same exact thing, right? Because if we were to take something like Catholic education, right, what we might do instead of either criticizing a child because they drew a flower that didn't look like the teacher's flower, we shouldn't do that. But we don't have unbridled creativity either. Right? What could we do? We could look at paintings of flowers over periods of time, different artists, different styles of flowers, right? We could show them real flowers. We could study the biology of flowers. We could learn all about flowers, right? And then maybe they could practice drawing perspective or practice flowers. Then the class could critique their flowers, and then they could help critique the other flowers, and they learn criticism, right, which is an important skill set to learn is criticism, right? And then they can maybe draw a second one after they've received the feedback, right? And then they could improve their flower, right? Which would actually be a practice of appreciation, listening, community, growth, which would be much better than unbridled praise for anything, right? Unbridled praise. It seems kind, but it's actually not kind. And my experience of this, not to pick on anybody, but I'm getting students who don't know how to read, they don't know how to do math, and they are also not creative. Right? It's one thing if you gave up reading and math to be creative. They're not more creative. They're less creative. Why? They've never learned to be creative. Because learning to be creative should be taught by a teacher who teaches creativity and appreciation and critical thinking and expression, right? Naturally, we're instinctive. Instinctive isn't good. It's okay, right? But we have to practice, right? We can become better. So in many ways, this has not changed at all. And not to be pessimistic or black-pilled by any of this, but I'm not overly optimistic with the students that are coming to college at the college age. I don't feel like they're particularly well prepared to be the future leaders of the world. I feel like they have been stunted by, bad philosophy, bad teaching philosophy, something like that. And I could go on for much longer. That could be a whole nother talk. He says, we have essentially created men without chest. Now that's one of his famous lines within The Abolition of Man, men without chest. He says, what we end up with is men who are stuck in their heads. They're intellectual, but they don't know anything about human beings. We got a lot of those out there. People stuck in their head. Academics, particularly, stuck in their head. He says we also have people stuck in their bellies. These are people stuck in their emotions. They do what they feel, right? Now, there is something to your gut, but what you really want is a well-formed conscience, not following your gut, right? There is a difference. John Henry Newman wrote a lot about that, Letter to the Duke of Norfolk, chapter 4. You should definitely read that, about the difference between your conscience and your belly. What he says is we need men with chest. A man with a chest is a man with heart and virtue and principles. Things like take care of your family, protect your wife. If you're a wife, protect your husband, right? You care for your children. You care for your neighbor, right? You defend the innocent. You're a person of value and you're willing to stand up for values, right? Our society is making people weak, either overly intellectual or totally stuck in their own pleasure and passions. Both of those will destroy a human being. What you need is the heart, because, again, if you think of the chest, it connects the head to the passions, right? It connects the two through the heart. We need the heart. The heart moderates the mind and the passions, right? We need more men with hearts. Men without chests is this problem. When moral education collapses, we produce individuals who produce intelligence and technical skills, but they lack the moral framework necessary to guide their abilities. Right? I end up with this, again, not to pick on poor students, but I end up with nursing students who they're very good at being able to do things, but they're not very good at thinking about should you do things. Right? Science can do a lot of things. The question is, should they do it? Right? And whenever you tell people you shouldn't do that, right? They don't like it. They don't like it, right? It's a restriction on their freedom, right? Their liberty. But we also need to have ethical scientists, ethical business people, right? So we need to have those moral formations. Now, C.S. Lewis talked too about these rise of conditioners. This is a term, conditioners. Instead, Lewis warns that the rejection of objective moral truth does not eliminate morality. Instead, it transfers moral authority to those who control society. He called these individuals conditioners. They are people who shape moral beliefs through education, media, political institutions. He writes, conditioners have been emancipated from all that. They stand outside the Tao. By their own principles, they are beyond good and evil. Now, some people are intentional conditioners, but a lot of people are unintentional conditioners. So the authors of the Green Book, or the authors of the assignment I just had in my class on Masters in Education class, these people are not trying to destroy society. They just are destroying society. They're unwillingly and unknowingly destroying society, right? There are people who are knowingly destroying society. Again, there are two different types of conditioners, those who know it and those who don't know it, right? There are people who want us to be relativistic. They want us to have no principles. Why? Because then we are very easily manipulated. Right? If you ask, should probably block my microphone. Right? If you look at some controversy, right? Why was the CIA, FBI, whatever why were they going to Latin masses? They can't control us. Why? We don't follow the rules. We don't follow all the paths, right? We stand for the truth, and we don't care what society thinks about it. We stand with Christ. We stand with the truth, right? Other people can be very easily manipulated by social pressure. There's some of us who are not so easily influenced by social pressure. We're more likely to stand with the truth. Well, that is a threat to the status quo, right? Again, I don't know if any thoughts on that. Yeah, what do you think?
Do you think that it's fair to say that sort of that kind of zealous commitment to relativism kills the noble in the human soul? It kills a human being's ability to sacrifice herself for the other or for the common good, it destroys that which is our appreciation for beauty and for nobility.
Yeah. So it's remind me, what's your name?
Helen.
Helen saying, right? Does this kill nobility and beauty, right? And definitely, right? It definitely does, right? Now the other part you said is does it make you not want to sacrifice?
Right. Sorry, I was trying to define what I meant by nobility.
Yeah. There is an element within our society, within this conditioners, that do want us to sacrifice. They want us to sacrifice all of ourselves for the people in charge. Right?
They can't sacrifice themselves because they've bought into the relativistic mindset. I'm saying, does believing that morality is relative lead to individuals who are unable to make sacrifices for others?
Yeah.
Or other people?
Yeah. It's a good question. Yeah. I think, Lewis would say, within the relativist society, they would want you to sacrifice everything, including moral judgment, for the sake of, I don't want to say the common good because it's not the common good, but the masses, right? You have to join the mob, sacrifice for the mob, right? But true sacrifice, should we sacrifice ourselves as Christians? Well, of course, right? But to good and noble things, right? For our family, right? For the truth, we sacrifice ourselves. But instead, the conditioners want us to sacrifice us on the altar of utilitarianism. Whatever gives most people pleasure, go along with the masses. Yeah.
But is that really sacrifice? Or is that just following our own pleasures, just going after whatever our whims are? That's not really sacrifice. That's just going,
Yeah, this is where the nefarious part of what C.S. Lewis is talking about comes in. C.S. Lewis thinks the people in charge are trying to get you to be bland, to not be anything or anyone. So you can be moldable into generic person that can be easily molded for whatever they want you to do, whatever they want you to be, right? Now, not to pick on anyone for any one thing, right? But you can see this too, where it's like, just let people, we'll give you like a minimum income. You can smoke your pot, you can play your video games, you can watch your pornography. Just, lay low. Live a little life. Very easily controllable, right? It's the people who want to do big and noble things, right, that stand out. Those are the people that are the threat, right? Those are threats because they actually stand for something. Well, those people can't be controlled, right? And we have a system that wants people to be nothing, right? Even, I like the tiny houses too, but like the tiny house thing, like, don't aspire to a real house, a house big enough that you could have a family in. Just have something big enough that you could die in, right? I don't know, like a little bigger than a coffin. Right, yeah, it's just like 3 times bigger than a coffin. Like, because you shouldn't make too much of an impact on the world, right? You're taking up too much space. And even when you die, you got to be cremated because there's only so much space. Like, we got to be very utilitarian and don't make just be tiny, right? Just be like you don't even exist. That's the moral thing. But it's very anti-human, right, if you think about it, yeah.
I just had another point with this. It's just like, we don't need to save space. We're below replacement birth rates at this point. And, like, we're going to be declining population in the next couple decades. There's no reason we need to, like, downsize and everything.
Yeah, but you do hear it, though, right? It's all about the carbon footprint. Yeah. It's about, if you have... Imagine somebody having like 4 or 5 kids. Oh, that's crazy, right? Why? You're taking up too much space, right? Who do you think you are? Why? Because we have a society that wants you to be very tiny, right? And if you're very tiny and you're very isolated, you're very manipulatable, right? And there's some people who would like to manipulate you, right? And that's why he says once we become a society that aims at non-existence, an anti-humanness, then you have tyranny, right? Because there are some people who are just echoing that. Like there's some people I like tiny houses. Like I might echo a tiny house thing, right? But there are people at the top who might be doing it very intentionally.
Helen like Trudy.
It might be done very intentionally to control the masses, right? Like Hitler wanted people to submit so he could do what he wants. Lenin wanted people to submit so he could do what he wants. Mao wanted people to be selfless so he could do what he wants. Well, if you actually had a whole society of virtuous, strong individuals who stood up for their family and their community and for God, this would not have happened, right? Yeah, Ryan?
Once we've lost our conviction that like human life has meaning despite suffering, despite all these bad things, then there's nothing else worth fighting for.
Yeah, just go along.
Nothing else worth fighting for.
Now I know we're getting out of time, but even in philosophy, if you took a shot every time you said Nazi Germany, people would be wasted by the end of every class. But Nazi Germany. The philosopher, everybody knows Adolf Hitler, but the philosopher behind Nazism was Alfred Rosenberg, who was not Jewish, in fact, but even despite the name. But his promotion of Nazism was by using relativism to neutralize people. And then he focused on race and political power as a form of morality. So your morality was your race. You're white, you're moral. You're non-Jewish, you're moral. It's as easy as that, right? If you're a Nazi, you're moral. Doesn't matter what you did. Being part of it is your morality, right? And again, not to pick on us, but we could look at that today. How many people have outsourced their morality to their political party? Right? I'm part of this political party, therefore I'm moral. Yeah, and whatever they do is justified, right? Because that's the moral party. Questionable, right? People like Rosenberg were very against Christianity because he thought it weakened people into believing in things like human dignity or compassion or equality before God. Terrible things, right? Things that, C.S. Lewis would have called the Tao, right? Or we would have called natural law. He wanted to replace Christianity with radical racial ideology centered on blood, race, and nation. The Soviets did this as well by replacing actual truth with the term political correctness. The term political correctness came out of the Soviet Union because there was what was true, but then there was what was politically correct, right? And you should always do what is politically correct. The truth didn't really matter. Again, you can do that through relativism. So, in my conclusion, right? We are often told that moral relativism promotes tolerance and freedom, but the classical philosophical traditions suggest otherwise. Thomas Aquinas teaches that law must be rooted in reason and ordered to the common good. C.S. Lewis warns that abandoning objective morality does not liberate humanity, but instead creates a world in which powerful shape morality according to their own desires. The choice before us, therefore, is clear. Either moral truth exists and power is limited by justice, or moral truth does not exist and power becomes the only law. If justice is not real, then tyranny is inevitable. And that is why the defense of objective moral truth is not merely a philosophical exercise, it is one of the most important safeguards of human freedom. If moral truth is not real, then justice is not real. And if justice is not real, then power becomes the only law. That's all I got.